Okay. All right. Welcome to Born to Be Wide. We've got some seats at the front here, or not even that far at the front. So if you're standing at the back, come and grab a pew. John, there's one there, right, with your name on it. You can sit in the same row as our resident heckler. And well, actually, we've got two hecklers in the front row today, Mark and Bruce. So yeah, there's a double act I'm preparing for. Welcome to Born to Be Wide. Welcome to everyone who's tuning in online. This is the first time that we've actually done a hybrid event, so streaming and having it in person. It's thanks to the Fruitmarket who are hosting us today. And we've got some other people to thank as well. So obviously our speakers, our DJs, who I'll be telling you about in a little while. But Creative Scotland, who supported this through the Recovery Fund. And also EHFM, who are overseeing the decks and doing some amazing stuff here in the city. So big up EHFM. They'll be hearing their efforts later on. Fiona's going to be DJing. And our plan tonight is to start off with this incredible launch that I believe should have happened in 2020, but is happening now somewhat later than anticipated. And it's the perfect way for us to restart Born to Be Wide, which has been going since 2004 as a way to bring together the music community here. And the last time we did a in-person event was in 2004, so quite a long time ago. Not 2004, fuck, I've given... It's been a long day, yeah. So in 2020, February 2020, yeah. That's a bit more recent, just like 2.5 years. So yeah, if you haven't bought a book, there'll be books available to buy afterwards, and Fiona and Jim have agreed to sign them. I know feel somewhat sheepish about this, but I said it was in the program that they were going to do this, so they have agreed. It's also worth mentioning that this book was a collaborative effort with Alison and Jonathan, who can't be here tonight, but who also did contribute. So it's if you've not read it yet, actually, hands up who's read the book. Okay, so quite a few of you. If you've not read it yet, it's jam-packed with all sorts of wonderful anecdotes and bits of information that even me, as an old kind of music geek, didn't know in all cases. So one of my favorites is the Eurovision one, which we'll come to. And yeah, I think really let's start off, guys. Let me introduce first Fiona Shepherd, who's the music critic of The Scotsman and also the co-founder of Glasgow Music City Tours and the Edinburgh Music Tours. And Jim Byers, erstwhile journalist, turns out he started at DJ Magazine shortly before I had my first piece published by them, and founder of Edinburgh Music Lovers. And also, they've got a music map of Edinburgh coming out, but unfortunately, it's not quite ready yet. So look out for that. It's been a long time coming. So, guys, let's start off. How did this book come about?
That's you, Jim.
Shall I go for that? Really came about because it feels like a story that needs to be told. Feels like Edinburgh's music story has been often overlooked. And my background is as a journalist. I started out at the List magazine here in Edinburgh, and I went down to London and worked at DJ Magazine, so I was writing about electronic music and club music, and really just a lifelong music lover. And when I was writing for those publications, I really felt my mission was kind of to shout about Edinburgh and put Edinburgh on the map. I was writing about clubs and so on in Edinburgh to sort of tell the world about how good Edinburgh was, and people were always surprised. You know, they were like, "Oh, well, we've heard of Manchester, we've heard of Glasgow, we've heard of all these other cities, but actually Edinburgh had a really powerful story to tell. So as a writer, I kind of always had an inkling to perhaps put this down on paper somewhere. And a few years ago when I'd moved back, I'd lived in London, I'd lived in Glasgow for a while, came back to Edinburgh, and I kind of felt like the narrative around music was a little bit negative, perhaps. There was some issues around venues closing, there was some issues around noise, and it kind of felt like, but at the same time we were on the cusp of something really exciting. It felt like the city, there was talk of some new venues coming through, there was lots of really interesting things happening. It kind of felt like there's maybe a new era for Edinburgh kind of brewing, and it felt like the kind of ideal opportunity to sort of document that. And Fiona and Jonathan and the team, you know, had a lot of knowledge from doing the Edinburgh music tours, so it was kind of like an ideal partnership.
Yeah, so Jim asked us to come on board. We'd started out in Glasgow. Full disclosure, I'm a Ouija. So we started out in Glasgow in 2015, and then when the Rip It Up exhibition came to the National Museum, that was the perfect opportunity to put together an Edinburgh music tour as well. And I think we felt much the same way as Jim, that we felt like Edinburgh's music story was not that well celebrated, and that it should be. And then researching the tour was a revelation, because there was just so much that I found interesting about Edinburgh and how it really was ahead of the game in many cases. You know, that it absolutely shouldn't be in the shadow of any other city. That it was at the forefront of the folk revival in the post-war years. It absolutely, you know, stole a march on other cities in terms of the punk scene and independent record labels. So I guess when Jim came to us, we were like, yep, we can help with that. We've already got a bit of knowledge, and then we expanded. You know, the tour was a tour that we did around the south side and around where the museum is, but it was an opportunity to then look at the wider story of the Edinburgh music scene, because you can't really talk about Edinburgh without mentioning like venues like the Playhouse, and we were nowhere near the Playhouse when we were doing our tour. So it was an opportunity to talk about that, and you know, older venues like Cinderella Rockefellers and Tiffany's and that kind of things, you know, that were further afield. So we absolutely jumped at the chance. But you did a wee Twitter pitch, didn't you?
Yeah, it's a true story. Yeah, there's a festival up north called Expo North. Some of you probably know, up in Inverness, which is kind of arts and music festival. And every year they have a Twitter book pitch, and you had to book your book idea in whatever it was, 180 characters or 200 characters. And I was out having a coffee one day in a coffee shop, having a few espressos, and I saw this going around on Twitter, and I just thought, you know, why don't we do Edinburgh's greatest hits? You know, the untold story of Edinburgh's music scene. And quite a few publishers liked the idea. And they got in touch, and it ended up with Berlin Books kindly took it on and were super enthusiastic and supportive. A local book label, so it kind of made total sense. So yeah, it kind of came out of that Twitter.
And it's worth bigging them up as well, because they've done a lot of music books. And you know, if there's Ali over there, just in my line of sight,
a wonderful editor.
Yes, who edited it. And I think that, you know, this is one of the nice things, again, that an Edinburgh publisher is publishing books about, you know, not just Edinburgh, but you know, Vic's book, Vic Galloway's book as well, about the whole 5 songs in the key of 5.
Best book title ever.
He would be here, but he's got his show on at the moment, but he might just pop in if he's taking the train back. But yeah, I mean, I think this is like you say, it's a story that's very often goes untold. I mean, people are aware of the Bay City Rollers. They perhaps aware now as well of Young Fathers, but there's so many things in between and either side of that. I mean, wherever I go in the world, if someone asks me what bands are from Edinburgh, and I mention The Exploited, their eyes still light up. I mean, I've literally made friends in Mexico when I was an exchange student there many, many years ago, just because you know, I mentioned the fact that I'd worked as a dishwasher next to Gary from The Exploited, and you know, this happened to me in Cuba not so long ago as well, and that kind of recognition factor is kind of incredible, because I think very often there are artists that aren't necessarily being thought of like Wet, Wet, Wet or Deacon Blue or, you know, one of those acts that's had like massive commercial success. But there are the commercial success stories as well. And I mean, I think that, you know, who's this, and I've forgotten his name, the old guy the guy that was like 5 foot tall or something.
Jackie Dennis.
Yeah. I mean, do you want to read it or do you want to summarize it, Fiona? What do you prefer?
The good thing about the book is if you're bored with one story, you'll be on to another one very quickly because it's literally just snippets almost. So I'll read. So we actually decided to open the book with Jackie Dennis because we love the story so much. Edinburgh's first pop star. So this is Jackie Dennis. Scotland. Bruce is saying yes. I agree, absolutely.
Oh, no, right, it's already started,
He's heckling
right?
already.
I was going to say, if you want to contribute something, we've got a microphone, so we will be involving the audience, but yeah, we'll wait till we give it to you, Bruce. But yes, on you go, Fiona.
So the Bay City Rollers are undoubtedly the most famous tartan-clad teeny bop superstars to emerge from Edinburgh, in fact from anywhere, but they were not the first. The city's first homegrown pop star, Jackie Dennis, who was born in Leith, was promoted as a kilted Elvis in 1958. The kilted choir boy, as he was known, couldn't quite compete with Elvis the Pelvis, as he stood only 4 feet 10 inches tall. It was said, somewhat unkindly, that his spiky red hair was bigger than his body. However, this does not stop Jackie from scoring a top 10 hit with La Di Da, 1 place ahead of Elvis's Jailhouse Rock at number 4. For a week, Jackie genuinely was bigger than Elvis. With the proceeds from the song, Jackie bought himself a Ford Zodiac. This was a pretty sweet set of wheels at the time, and Jackie personalised it not only with the number plate JD32, but also with an in-car record player. Very enviable, but surely a bit sugly and not terribly practical. More enduringly, he became the first British rock and roll artist to make it onto US television when he appeared on Perry Como's Kraft Music Hall in October 1958. Later in life, Dennis worked as a carer in a nursing home. He passed away in 2020, but the lilt with the kilt will always be bigger than Elvis around these parts.
How did you find out about Jackie?
I can't remember. Researching the tour, almost certainly researching the tour. I think you just, you know, when you're doing any kind of research, it just sends you down different kind of rabbit holes. And I wasn't aware of him before we were researching the tours, but then it became clear that he was an important part of the Edinburgh story and mentioned in the exhibition as well. And I think invited back to the Festival Theatre shortly before he passed away. So I think he had a wee sort of, like, he was kind of reclaimed and had a little burst of acknowledgement before he passed away in 2020. So.
And Jim, did you take the same approach to the research, or how did you go about it? Because I guess there were certain things that were already on the tour, but you must have discovered quite a lot of stuff separately from that.
It was a kind of mixture of our own personal experiences as Fiona and I were music journalists at the same time at the List, weren't we? So kind of our own experiences in the music scene, so we kind of called on that. But also I reached out to some important people like Bruce Finlay here, manager of Simple Minds in the front row, to pick his brains, obviously, as somebody who was actually there. Pete Irvin, who I don't think is here right now, but he, one of Scotland's most important music and event promoters, he has been very kind to mentor me through setting up Edinburgh Music Lovers, actually. So just going through that process of talking about Edinburgh and its music history and its music scene and trying to give some context to it. And he was super helpful in terms of providing a lot of anecdotes, and Bruce was super helpful as well. And there was other people in the music scene who I was able to go out and sense check and fact check and but a real mixture of anecdotes and kind of, heavily researched things.
I think this is one of those things as well where, we've found with the events that we do that we had Barry Wright, who obviously is the other half of regular music when it became really big, and, of the Castle concerts as well. And what we realized was that in speaking to him, speaking to Bruce, and to Pete, was that really we were finding out about things that weren't even they weren't published anywhere. I mean, at that point, I was living downstairs from Barry's daughter, and it turned out he'd had most of the band Gong and their family in this tiny little flat when they put them on. And she remembers meeting Iggy Pop in the Antiquary when she was 8. But you don't really get those kind of you don't get those stories in newspapers, or it's almost like oral history, really, isn't it?
I think the really interesting thing that I sent Pete some proofs and some drafts of the work, and the big thing that he kind of brought up to me was his insight that it's easy to not know that Edinburgh pioneered the live music scene for a while in Scotland in the 70s, 80s. It was the one that was bringing all the bands to the city. He had his Monday nights at Tiffany's, and all these incredible bands coming to Edinburgh on a Monday night. Edinburgh was the place to go and tour, in the 70s and 80s, and he was really good at bringing that perspective to it and reminding us of how things have kind of changed. And obviously there's been highs and lows over the decades, but he was really helpful in pointing that out, and it's a story that not a lot of people know.
I think it's interesting as well, because a friend of mine mentioned a letter that someone had written to Sounds, I think it was, or it was Sounds or NME, complaining about the fact that not enough bands stopped off in Glasgow when they were touring and were playing here in Edinburgh. And I mean, it sounds funny now, but this was in the 80s, and I think as an being under 18. I was lucky enough to be able to see loads of shows, especially those guys promoted at the Playhouse. I mean, we won't talk about the utter thugs that were employed as security. This was in the days before background checks and stuff. But I mean, I saw people really sort of battered, just queuing up for tickets and stuff. But the thing is you had this opportunity to go and check out touring bands. I mean, everyone really, and I think that that's something where it's great to have that documented. And I went to the Playhouse a few years ago to see St. Vincent, and it was it's part of the International Festival, and it was an incredible sort of feeling of like remembering suddenly all the rows you'd sat on, from everything from Wasp to U2, and it's that played a huge role, and it's like you say, it's not really recognized as much as it should be, perhaps. And I mean, I think that the pop element of it as well is really interesting. John Lennon having an aunt somewhere out near Murrayfield,
Ormadale Terrace,
number 15.
Opposite my aunt and uncle's house, just as an aside. Yeah.
Right, I had a taxi driver once. This is going to get into total Edinburgh sort of chat, right? But it is a celebration of Edinburgh's music scene. I had a taxi driver. I think he picked up a woman who was talking about how her son was a son-in-law. Our daughter's boyfriend was a mad Beatles fan, and that he was also a musician. And it turned out it was one of the Gallagher brothers from Oasis. I can't remember which one, but it was like that kind of thing where, actually John Lennon stayed next door when he was in town. And again, in lots of places you have plaques going up for that, and we don't really have much of that yet,
Stuart Sutcliffe as well, original bassist, I think, of Beatles, born in Edinburgh. So there's strong connections,
So one of the things that I loved was the McKinley sisters, and I think we actually have a photo of them somewhere. I don't know if you've got that handy. Have I got the photo? Wow, there we go. Look at this. Can you read us a wee bit about these guys? 'Cause one of them I think played International Festival night.
So the surviving sister, Carla J. Easton, put together a sort of celebration of Scottish female pop musicians, and she was invited to perform. So here's what we had to say about the McKinleys. McKinleys were one of the great unsung girl groups of Scotland. Born in Little France, Edinburgh, sibling duo Sheila and Jeanette McKinley cut their teeth on the same Hamburg scene as the Beatles, who joined their fan club, and went on to perform with the Rolling Stones, Donovan and the Hollies. They released 4 singles in the mid-60s, including the Phil Spector-ish Someone Cares For Me and the groovy Sweet and Tender Romance, which featured on hip music TV show Ready Steady Go. That's them on Ready Steady Go, actually. The sisters were dropped by their label after their singles failed to chart, and they moved back to Germany, where they enjoyed some success separately. Sheila as a solo artist and Jeanette as one half of the duo Windows, who topped the German charts in 1972 with the chirpy Euro-trash tune How'd You Do? Check it out on YouTube. Sheila passed away in 2012, but in 2018, Jeanette came out of retirement to perform at a girl group celebration concert at the Edinburgh International Festival.
I think that's great, you know, and I think it's really nice when people get that kind of recognition, you know, even if it's many, many years later. I mean, I have to admit, I was really quite keen to get Mary Sandeman, a.k.a. Annika, who had a massive hit with Japanese Boy, but she lives somewhere way up north, and I was like, I don't know if we can afford to bring her down. I made some inquiries, you know, but it is kind of interesting when you've got these records that have been huge all over the world, you know, and not just in the UK, and that you're not necessarily aware of where they've actually come from. I mean, Jim, I know that you were particularly surprised about one revelation in the King's Theatre. I mean, how did you discover this?
Well, yeah, this is one of my favourite stories in the book, actually. So, King's Theatre, where we go to the Panto every year and see the Panto with the family. Turns out in 1973, which was the year I was born, Led Zeppelin played there. £1 for a ticket. £1 to see Led Zeppelin at the King's Theatre. And, you know, a beautiful venue, but actually quite a good example, perhaps, of how Edinburgh, you know, there hasn't been much music, to my knowledge, in that venue since. We saw Jarvis Cocker and Chili Gonzalez do something in the Edinburgh International Festival 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. There hasn't been much music in there, but what a beautiful space for music. The King's Theatre, and obviously it's going through renovations and things, but £1 to see Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
What an amazing
in the King's Theatre.
In the King's Theatre, whereas normally the Panto.
Yeah, I mean, I just got these sort of these images of, or this picture of people sort of call and response, or going, look behind you, you know, and Jimmy. Have you got any sort of favourite stories, Fiona? I mean, anything that you discovered that you were like, wow?
Well, I think I had a vague recollection before we started researching, but I love discovering who'd lived in Edinburgh, and I think the David Bowie connection, I think, is probably the most exciting one, that he lived in Edinburgh for a period of time just at the turn of into the 1970s, and he'd already had a hit with Space Oddity, but then the kind of the trail had gone cold. And he came here because his mentor, Lindsay Kemp, was living in Edinburgh at the time, so he shared a flat and I believe also a mattress with him in a basement. Well, there's actually, what's interesting is there's quite a few locations around Edinburgh that are claiming David Bowie slept here, and I think he did probably stay in more than one place, but Drummond Street, there's a basement flat in Drummond Street that I think Pete Irvin went on to buy. So that was interesting to kind of uncover that. And you know, like Nico lived in Edinburgh for a short period of time as well.
Yeah, this is apparently she was going out with Rab King from the Scars, and this is missing out of the Nico biography, which I was a bit irritated by, because I was like, well, how could you miss that out? Because it was apparently in St. Stephen Street, I'd heard, but you're never really sure, because there was Rab's some kind of professor now, and you know, he doesn't live here, but next time I see him, I have to ask him. But the other one was Marky Smith. I mean, where did Marky Smith from The Fall live? Do you know?
I don't think I did. No, did he live in Leith? He used to go. He used to go. Sorry.
Lady Lawson Street. Did you ever visit him, John?
No, we stayed next to from the
Okay, so that's good. We've now. This has been, because I think when he died, lots of people were like, "Where did he actually live?" You know.
I think I'm thinking about the fact that he liked to hang out at the Whiskey Society.
That's in Leith.
That was quite curious, wasn't it?
That's
quite a formal setting to be.
Yeah.
Marky Smith.
And also the science and science libraries, like in the National Library and things like that. He said, I think there's a quote in the book, and I think it's just something like, it was dead civilised. Some guys would bring in hip flasks and you could have a cigarette and you loved hanging out there. And then, of course, famously, he wrote Edinburgh Man, so celebrating his love for the city. And I mean, I think he and Brix had just split up, and he sort of came here kind of perhaps heartbroken, but he kind of escaped to Edinburgh, and then I think he always had a great affection for the city, I think.
And one of my favourites was, and this was such a revelation to me because I picked up quite a lot of things, but when you did the sort of trial tour of Edinburgh, and I went, you were kind enough to invite me on it, and the story of the Eurovision taking place in the Usher Hall. I mean, maybe you should just read that, because it is, especially it's quite topical with the idea that Eurovision could actually end up in Scotland again, albeit in Glasgow. But the idea that Eurovision took place here is quite something.
Okay, so here's the Eurovision Gen. The Eurovision Skinny. So Edinburgh is the only Scottish city to have hosted the much-loved cheese fest that is the Eurovision Song Contest. Monaco won the competition in 1971, but in contravention of established custom, failed to muster a suitable venue for the next year's bash. Edinburgh stepped into the breach, and in 1972 the competition was held in the Usher Hall. While the performances took place in the Lothian Road venue, the judges were sequestered in Edinburgh Castle, where they watched the competitors on television. They were kept in isolation as the organisers were afraid that malign forces would try to nobble the jury. One version of history has it that the Spanish dictator Franco had done just that a few years earlier and robbed Cliff Richard of victory in the dastardly process. Allegedly, the jury was rigged so that Spain won and would host the competition the following year. If true, it would be one of the dictator's less toxic crimes. Of course, 1972 was back in the days when Britain was able to enter the competition without fear of nul point. Oh, we're now out of date, now totally out of date there, yeah. That's it, we'll need to rewrite that. And the New Seekers, featuring Scottish singer Eve Graham, came a respectable second with Beg, Steal or Borrow to eventual winner, does anyone know? Vicky Leandros of Luxembourg.
Ah, Vicky Leandros. Any Germans in the house? She still has a pretty thriving career in Germany.
She retweeted us when we did something about it. Yeah, that was a highlight.
So, I mean, I think one of the, obviously people know about the Bay City Rollers. I did mention the Exploited, but of course I can do this, right? Well, there's the Bay City Rollers. And there's Rosillo. Is it Faye Fife here? She arrived yet. She's going to be DJing later on. And Eddie, the bar manager here, was telling me that his mate's dad designed the logo. So there you go. It's a small world, yeah. And so that's got there's some pop punk for you. And then here's the Exploited. I mean, I thought Michael was like, let's do this 3 times, and I think that's a good idea. I mean, it should be celebrated. Now, the reason that I think that Edinburgh's, produced one of the biggest punk bands in the world, or let's say one of the most enduring punk bands in the world, because what he's still at it and still touring, is because Glasgow banned punk, right? I mean, this is one of the things. So we're going to switch it over to the West Coast quickly, because this is on Fiona's amazing Glasgow Music City tour. In fact, there's a couple. I recommend them both highly. But can you just tell us what happened there, and then give some context to this?
Sure. So in Glasgow, I mean, I guess punk raised a stink everywhere. That was the whole point. But we took it a wee bit further in Glasgow, and the City Council banned punk following a Stranglers concert at the City Halls, where a stage invasion was construed to be a riot, and that was the excuse they needed to ban punk. Actually, we've had guests on our tour that were at that concert, and one even lent us his photographs of that gig, and it wasn't even, never mind a riot, it wasn't a stage invasion, it was a few people milling around on stage. But the upshot was that the grassroots scene, if you ran a pub or a club in Glasgow, you were in danger of losing your licence if you put on a punk show. the big artists still came to play though, because you'd still get the Clash at the Apollo and things like that. But it really did mean that the local scene, the grassroots scene in Glasgow just could not flourish at all. And so that's where Paisley became the destiny. If you were a West Coast punk fan, you'd go out to Paisley, and they benefited from the ban Bungalow Bar and Silver Thread Hotel putting on shows in the West Coast. Meanwhile, though, Edinburgh already has independent record labels and is just getting on with it in terms of releasing punk stuff and putting and creating a grassroots scene, and that's really what it's about anyway. I always say in our tours that any healthy music scene in any city has to grow from the ground up. So if you basically stifle a scene at birth, then that's not a good look. It's quite an embarrassment for the UK's first UNESCO City of Music that we banned punk. But like I say, there was other places to go, and Edinburgh had an amazing scene kind of round the art school and round Bob Lass and Hilary Morrison's flat, which is in Keir Street. So and the Tapolorison pub was kind of like the annex, the office annex, if you like.
We used to go there after my O grades at school. So when we were 15, Mark here at the front here lived just down the road from that. But yeah, the tap was a most reasonable boozer, and they never really asked for any ID either, so made it even better when you're 15 and you've just finished your O grade arithmetic. But it's interesting because this is one thing I wanted to ask you, was if there was anything you left out of the book, and there's a link to this, because as you're talking about punk, I was thinking of one. Well, there were a couple of actual pretty much riots where there was fully fledged swedging with the Rozzers. One at an infamous Conflict show in what was the place, and then there was another one, I think, at Wilkie House with Back to the Planet, and in the early 90s. I mean, are you aware of either of those two? Because there was quite a big sort of anarcho-punk community in Edinburgh in the 80s with Hoi Polloi, who ended up singing in Gaelic, and Political Asylum, Sad Society, and then, that kind of, I guess, went on to the Cas Rock Cafe, which you do mention.
It's not one that I'm overly familiar with, but I just love the idea of Edinburgh, this conservative or slightly conservative city, having this amazing hardcore punk scene. It just seems such a lovely sort of culture clash, and I think that's what's interesting about Edinburgh, having that eclectic music history. I think that's what comes through for me sometimes when I'm thinking about Edinburgh. It's like the different bands, the different sounds. It maybe hasn't had a defined sound like some cities, like a Manchester might have had a Manchester scene or a Glasgow sound or whatever. Maybe, arguably, perhaps Edinburgh's had this eclectic creative spirit, which I think is quite nice, which I think is one of its strengths, if you like. So it's just lovely to think of this punk scene emerging from Edinburgh.
I think it's also good to have to have something to kick against. So I think often places that appear to be more conservative or staid, there's always going to be some kind of underbelly, kind of, punk is one example, but if you go forward, like maybe more than a decade before then, and you think about folk music, and that it is literally traditional music, but one of the most, I would argue, probably the most influential band ever to come out of Edinburgh, the Incredible String Band, created something completely new out of folk music. I think maybe the drugs helped, but they were trailblazers in terms of doing something that was quite different. And Mike Herron has written a really lovely memoir where he just talks about, I think was very much enthralled to Edinburgh, but also very much to this, again, a grassroots scene, which was mainly taking place around the Crown Bar and the Howff. So a couple of great folk venues that are long gone, and did something really that then had global significance. They were the only Scottish band to play at the Woodstock Festival, and they would have been in the film, but they refused to go on, I think, the night where they were filming because it was raining, and they were like, well, we're an electric folk band. We don't want to be electrocuted. And then they missed their chance to get in the film. But, hugely influential band.
I think, this idea of having these amazing scenes, if you like, that haven't perhaps been talked about as much as they should be. Fast forward to the 90s in Edinburgh's clubbing scene, which I was lucky to be sort of in the midst of, if you like. And at the time I was writing for DJ magazine. I was living in London, and I was lucky enough to be able to travel the world and go to different club scenes around the world, in Ibiza and Germany and Japan and things like that. And actually, every time I came back to Edinburgh, I was like, we have these clubs, like Pure, the famous techno club on a Friday night, or we had Tribal Function, the house club, and we had Yip Yap, and we had these clubs which were the equal, if not better, than any of these clubs.
It's so good you say this, because I remember going to clubs in Edinburgh where there was a lot less of this, having to dress up or shirt and tie only, that kind of crap, and Sonia in the audience, her brother Ernesto ran a club that was playing, a really eclectic mixture, and it was just in the venue, and there was just a mindset of like, if you know about my club, you must be okay, and you're coming in, doesn't matter what you're wearing. And I think there was those fusions as well of different communities coming together. I mean, we did an online Born to Be Wild with Keith McIver from Pure and Optimo, and we were talking about this the gay scene coming together with the punk scene, with Fire Island and the Blue Monday Club, and the goths as well. And really, when pre-Pure, when you had UFO, I remember these people in baggy sort of t-shirts that had seen a rave on telly turning up, and everyone thought they were dicks. It was like, guys, we've been dancing this for ages. It's like, you're not that cool. You're just doing what you've seen on telly with your flares and all the rest of it, right? And the thing is that it's, you fast forward to, Martin Bennett, where, you had that trad scene in the 90s coming together with the club scene because of Black Bows, and where, everyone was going there before they went on. And I think that's been sort of something that is perhaps not really celebrated enough, that you have had those kind of different cultures coming together. But I also think that, and I think what I was going to say is, I went to London and lived in London in 1995, and I'm like, your clubs are shite. Really, it costs a fortune to get in. You're really snooty about who goes in, and then when you get in, no one seems to be having a very good time. It's like, you want to check out these clubs in my city, and when I came home, it was really difficult to get anyone when I came home as a journalist, I was like, I want to write about you. And
yeah, I think that's true, and that's where my love of the writing about it at the time, when I was writing for the magazines and so on, it was this pleasure to be able to say, hold on a minute, we've got these absolutely unbelievable clubs in this city that you might not have heard much about. And we used to bring occasionally journalists up and take them to these clubs, and they'd be wetting their pants because of how full on these clubs were. They hadn't seen anything like it, and they couldn't believe it, these clubs. So it was a real pleasure to be able to share that, and I think that's come through now full circle with the book. It's like being able to share those stories and being able to talk about Edinburgh in that positive way, and give it a leg up, and do a little bit to put it on the map in that sense. Obviously it's on the map, but give a leg up is a real joy, I think.
I haven't brought my glasses, so I'm not going to read it, but you do allude to Fred Deacon, who, with Murray McKean did the Gasto Weekendo, Misery, and Going Places, and Misery has a special place in my heart, because again, I think this didn't work in Glasgow, it didn't work in Aberdeen, and it certainly didn't work in London. But the whole concept was that they just played horrific music all night, and pretty much every time they'd have a fridge on the dance floor, which at some point was ritually destroyed. And it attracted pretty much everyone who was active in the Edinburgh club scene. Like DJs, I could see George at the back there. He was a regular. And there was a lot of us went there. We went out clubbing 2 or 3 times a week, but everyone would go to Misery to listen to the Final Countdown and Bon Jovi, and ritually smash up a fridge. There was Orville E as well. Does anyone remember Keith Harris and Orville? It was basically a ventriloquist with his hand up this green duck's arse, right? And they'd sampled this thing saying E and made a kind of really cheesy rave tune out of it. But this was successful, and then that gave rise to Going Places, which was, you know, an easy listening night. Yeah. I mean, describe it, Jim, because I mean, I think that you do write about it, and I think it's kind of hard to really imagine that.
For me, uniquely Edinburgh, it was just so charismatic with the kind of people dressing up and the different kind of easy listening themes, and you know, you couldn't think of another city that would have a club like that, and I think that's what Edinburgh was good at. It was having those completely unique establishments, and that went on for God knows how many years. And Fred Deacon, an incredibly creative person who went on to make music, you know, Lemon Jelly and things like that. So what I was thinking was, it's interesting about the clubbing scene, how it's come almost full circle. If you think about we're talking about the 90s. I'm a bit older now, but you know, today's club scene in Edinburgh with the likes of Fly, Terminal V, and these huge large-scale electronic events, you know, some of the biggest clubbing events in the country, you know, and it's amazing to see how Edinburgh's come from that period in the 90s back full circle, having huge house music events in Princes Street Gardens. You know, who would have thought that? I know there's maybe a couple of small things there, but having 3,000 people dancing to, you know, house music underneath the Edinburgh Castle is quite a thing, you know, and it's really a global phenomenon to see Edinburgh doing those sort of things. I think giving the city that recognition for those things is great.
And I think that was, you know, Dennis, forgotten his second name, doing the DJ set at Edinburgh Castle. That was a Fly production, and that's right. And and Patrick Topping doing it for Terminal V on Carlton Hill. And these were like, they were getting millions of streams, and it's kind of, this is in the midst of the pandemic, and I think this is what's becoming exciting now. And I think that, you know, 4 years ago we had a panel that was just talking about you know, what the Edinburgh festivals could do, and by that I'm sort of talking about the International Festival, Book Festival, and of course the Fringe, we'd be doing to, you know, help foster more of local music during during August. And I think this has been the incredible reset, and is, you know, a big thank you to the Fringe, because they've really supported tonight as well. And you know, Matt's in here, so you know, get an introduction to him, because there's been I think this past couple of years has been a real. Are you over there, Matt? Can I identify? He's got the best moustache in the house, and I think that, you know.
I think it's an important point, you know, to see somebody like Matt who's trying to bring music back through the Fringe, and you know, it is curious that we have a lot of festivals. We have whatever it is, 12, 13 festivals, I think, in Edinburgh, and we don't have a kind of large Edinburgh Music Festival. It's quite curious. Well,
we've got Connect happening at the end of the month.
We do, which is amazing.
We've had like weeks of huge concerts, right? And I think this is my point. I don't remember in Edinburgh, even during Tea and the Fringe, where there was so many gigs happening in the city. And I think that this is going to look set to continue, you know, with DF carrying on, but with the Fly. There's so much going on now. And did you anticipate this when you wrote the book?
Well, when I set up Edinburgh Music Lovers originally, which was 2018 or something like that, it was driven by this feeling that Edinburgh was kind of on the cusp of something special. There was lots going on. There was kind of talk of new venues, and it felt like we needed to talk about it. We needed a platform for it. We needed to sort of celebrate it. And I think the previous narrative was around venues going away, but you know, cities' venues do come and go, and now we have plans for a new venue, you know, just off St Andrew's Square, the first one in 100 years. May not be everybody's cup of tea, however, it's a major development to have a new venue, you know, whatever you think of the size and so on. There's all these festivals, there's Connect, there's the dance music festivals, there's more and more bands coming to play the city, which in the past you might have thought people would have said, well, hold on, my favourite artist is not coming, this is really annoying, but I think that's changed a lot. So it feels like a really positive time, and I think that's the book hopefully kind of contributes to.
I've started to get a bit irritated, and I mean, I have to admit that we've interviewed people for internships over the past few years, and they're like, yeah, I just don't, you know, nothing happening in Edinburgh. I don't really know the Edinburgh music scene. I just go out in Glasgow, and I'm like, well, you can fuck off. I'm like, really, it's like, you've got so many venues here. I don't remember a time where there were that many quality small venues as well. Obviously we've got, Sneaky Pete's, we've got the Voodoo Rooms, we've got, the Depot is going to be reopening once they get their building warrants sorted out. There's so much to the Caves, La Belle Angel, Mash House, Jazz Bar, Royal Oak for sessions. There's so much happening in the city, and I think that thing that there's maybe a bit of a weird mindset where people just kind of do down the local music scene, and it almost becomes like this in their own heads, this self-fulfilling thing.
I think there was too much of that, and I think it's like, hey, let's just be excited about what we've got. Let's be proud of what we got, and can't let the conversation go without mentioning Lee Theatre as well, because
Summer Hall.
But one of the original inspirations for me in Edinburgh Music Lovers Again and the book was I was a volunteer for Hidden Door Festival. I don't know if everyone's been to Hidden Door Festival, but a lot of nodding heads. But an amazing volunteer-run arts and music festival which brings derelict spaces back to life, basically, and fills them with music. And I volunteered for them a bit, and I was cleaning the pigeon poo off the seats in Lee Theatre in, I don't know when this was, 2017 or 18, or whenever they first got in there. And I'd never even heard of Lee Theatre. I was born and raised in Edinburgh. I'd never even heard of it. I mean, how weird is that?
You hadn't even heard about the famous Wombles gig at
No,
Lee
I
Theatre?
I hadn't heard anything, but maybe that's just me, my lack of knowledge. But however,
Were you at the Wombles gig, Mark? Was it good?
But just walking into that space and seeing this incredibly atmospheric venue hidden away behind this library that maybe lots of people had heard about it, but it's still surprising now how many people haven't heard about it. And obviously it's still not open full time, and it's coming back to life, however. But the excitement that Hidden Door Festival generated in me, it kind of lit a fire, I think, in not just me, but in a lot of people in Edinburgh, to say, hold on, look at what we've actually got on our doorstep. Look at what the creative people are creating. Look at what we can do. It's a pretty unique thing.
And then, of course, Hidden Door's most recent venue was the Old Royal High, which is currently, they've had music on all summer, and the Pianodrome is there at the moment, and it will be, I believe, St Mary's Music School going forward. Tinderbox Orchestra have just rocked a few weekends of just amazing performances in the Grand Hall. So yeah, that's another kind of potential source of a music academy, but also a venue.
I'm conscious that we've got like 10 minutes left, and somewhere there's a microphone. Cairo's got a microphone, and Temi has got a camera. So if you're, does anyone have a question? And you're being streamed. So yes, Steve, Cairo. We'll start at the back there, and then it's Mikey.
Hi there.
Do you want to stand up, Mikey, so that the
Yeah, sure.
audience online can see your physique? Yeah.
So one thing that a memory that I have of the Edinburgh music scene is, which hasn't been mentioned yet, and I think it's worthy of a little shout, is Blair Street and Idrie Street practice rooms, which
Oh yes.
going from Hunter Square down to the Cowgate on either side, and basically right now these are, and this is a great thing. These days these are they've basically been morphed into clubs, venues, nightclubs, and they're basically, it's a thriving sort of centre of fun and nightlife and so on, just as it should be. Back in the day, back in the 1980s, these were all practice rooms in there, and that was a hub of the local music scene. And believe me, they've come up a long way since then. They were dungeons, I'm telling you. I remember going down there one time, and there had been a bit of rain, and I found my amp was actually sitting in about 6 inches of water. Not very safe. But there's another little anecdote that's worth relating as well. There was a mate of mine, Davy Lawson, was in a band called Munch. They had a singer, Ollie, who was known for sort of like taking a bit of a mental epi sometimes, right? And one time he basically did this dramatic sort of cursor to that video of Run DMC and Aerosmith, where, you know, he smashes his microphone through the wall, right? Well, Ollie noticed that the wall was looking a bit dodgy, and he got stuck into it with his mic stand. What happens? Bloody bricks all fall away, sticks his head through there. He's in the city chambers, basically.
Wow, I thought you were going to say he was in Blair Street sauna. But
yeah, amazing little piece of Edinburgh.
that was
history
quite
there.
an amazing place as well, and it was minging. I mean, like, so many bands practiced in there, and then, you know, Norrie Rowan turned it into, well, you know, the vault. So what's that place where your drinks get spiked, allegedly?
Which one's
it was the
you're not
vault.
getting spiked?
Yeah, I must remember to go there. I get a free hit.